world's oldest profession, prostitution, will soon be legal here in Taiwan. A new bill will allow for sex to be sold openly in special red light districts. The government says the legislation will help regulate the industry and stop sexual exploitation and abuse, but critics are doubtful of a positive impact. I'm Fauzia Ibrahim. On this edition of 101 East, we ask if legalizing prostitution will help clean up Taiwan's sex industry.
It's a cop-out policy.
做了3次的报告。
Even the death penalty issue didn't get as much attention as this amendment drafting.
The central government say that it depends on the local government. But the local government say none of us want to create a legal red light district.
我叫琪琪，今年28岁。
My name is Chi-Chi. I'm 28 years old, and I've been working as a prostitute at a nightclub for the past year.
Chi-Chi got divorced a year ago. Left with a 4-year-old son and no money, she needed work. After searching the classifieds in her local newspaper, she came across an advert for work in the sex industry.
会去那边工作的小孩是
The reasons we work in the business are simple. We either need the money or we like to fool around. The company says we need to provide some services to the clients within 20 minutes of them arriving at a private suite. Clients buy time to spend with us. If they like us, they will buy more time, and I earn more money.
Chi-Chi is one of an estimated 100,000 illegal sex workers in Taiwan. If she is caught providing sexual services, she either goes to jail or pays a fine, while her clients go unpunished. But prostitution could soon be legal in Taiwan. Recently, Parliament passed a controversial draft bill allowing the establishment of red light districts, which will allow sex to be sold openly in designated areas.
面对这个事实。
Some prostitution businesses have grown out of control and have brought trouble to their communities. Why not take the chance of better managing the business and regulating it?
In Taiwan, if we don't allow such businesses to exist, people simply go underground. Also, sexually transmitted diseases are spreading. If you open up the industry and manage it, you can better control the spread of AIDS.
Chi-Chi says the legislation will improve working conditions.
If you set up the districts, they can be run under supervision more transparently. Right now, we often need to run away to avoid the police or make deals under the table. It will help to build a healthier and less complicated business environment.
But not everyone agrees. Legislator Yu Shengwu is against moves to decriminalize prostitution.
If sex trades are allowed to take place across the nation, finding a sex worker will be as easy as going shopping at a 7-Eleven. Last year, the government was considering allowing individual sex workers to run their own registered businesses in the commercial districts. But we are opposed to the idea. I've strongly objected to this publicly, as I'm concerned brothels will spring up everywhere.
Women's groups in Taiwan are also concerned that introducing legal red light districts could encourage human trafficking.
Take
the red light districts in the Netherlands. Prostitutes get drug addictions, there's more human trafficking in the area. It doesn't make them safer, and it harms women's social status. Governments in Stockholm and Rotterdam have decided to decrease the size of their red light districts. They may even abolish them. So we should learn these lessons from other countries.
Auntie Li Jung was a sex worker in the 1980s and 1990s who has long fought for the rights of prostitutes.
If I didn't feed my children and left them hungry or feeling cold, or if I stole food and clothes, that would be far more shameful than being a prostitute. I worked in the sex industry because it was the only way I could raise my children.
The road to decriminalizing prostitution has had a winding path. During the island's colonization by Japan, brothels like this one were allowed to operate in certain districts of Taiwan. During World War II, many women were recruited or coerced into being comfort women for the Japanese. After the war, the custom continued, with many girls choosing prostitution to support their families. For the next 50 years, a kind of hush-hush permissiveness pervaded the country, with brothels sitting next door to temples.
It looks pretty much the same as any house in the neighborhood. The sex workers don't look that different to the aunties living next door. We are not different from any of our neighbors. It's just a difference in the titles of our jobs.
Let sex workers do their thing. They have maintained very good relationships with their neighborhood, contrary to what people think. Not everybody is trying to drive sex workers out of the area, because actually a lot of the livelihoods in the local neighborhood are connected with the sex work industry. Washing of the towels, the linens, preparing food, snacks, taxi drivers driving people back and forth. A lot of people depend on the existence of the sex work industry.
Professor Josephine Ho has been a strong supporter of decriminalization and prostitutes' rights for many years.
Actually, I collected a lot of memorabilia from previous struggles. For example, this one. This one says legalization of sex work. So there is a system of licensed prostitution up until 1997, when Taipei City Mayor decided to revoke existing licenses.
Sex workers like Auntie Li Jung banded together to fight back.
We used to follow the former Taipei City Mayor as if we were his shadow. Whenever we learned he was going somewhere, we'd follow him. We often went to protest at the City Hall and the City Council Hall.
For the past 20 years, the prostitute rights movement have certainly done a lot of work organizing sex workers and educating the residents of the city to accept sex work. And I think we should work toward changing the environment rather than regulation, limitation, restriction, putting people back into undemocratic measures of control.
Government surveys show 75% of Taiwanese support a more liberal approach to prostitution, but it appears no one wants it in their backyard. All 22 local government mayors have spoken out against introducing legal red light districts in their cities.
It's like when we need to build new salvage yards or funeral homes. Everyone needs it, but no one really wants it in their neighborhood.
But the government says concerns that red light districts will increase social problems are invalid.
It'll
be nothing like that. People still need to apply for business registration to run a prostitution business. Owners can't have criminal records, and their licenses will be suspended if they commit a crime. And all prostitutes need to register. The government will also monitor public hygiene.
But local governments say not enough planning has been done to introduce red light districts by November.
There's no mechanisms in place to manage this, and no consensus amongst the public. It's going to be very difficult to set up red light districts in such a short period of time.
Taiwan is a traditional conservative society, but you don't have to look far to find evidence of illegal activity. This is Longshang Temple in downtown Taipei. It's one of the oldest temples around and is a popular tourist destination. It also happens to sit slap bang in the middle of a notorious red light district. Let's go take a look. Within a minute's walk from the temple, we find evidence of prostitution everywhere. One area that is being cleaned up is Taiwan's betel nut girl industry. Famous for their skimpy outfits, the girls sell betel nuts as well as cigarettes and cold drinks to passing motorists. Government regulation over the past decade has cracked down on underage girls and their uniforms.
In the past, I've seen some other beaten up girls wearing their bra and underpants only. Now people often lay complaints at the police station, so the police now inspect beaten up vendors more strictly than before.
And now the government hopes to regulate the sex work industry.
The government doesn't encourage people to earn their living in prostitution, no matter how poor they are. They should ask for help from social welfare instead. But we also need to consider the needs of human beings, as not everyone is married. Secondly, we also need to consider where existing prostitution houses should go.
But Professor Josephine Ho says the focus should be on protecting all women from exploitation and abuse, rather than debating where red light districts will be established.
Sex workers are no longer sitting in a brothel waiting for business. They're mobile. And then there's always the internet, the cell phone, that helps any kind of communication. So I think by talking about a designated red light zone, you're really not facing up to the reality and the prevalence and the popularity of all forms of sexual transaction.
While others are concerned that these districts could be mismanaged.
What worries me more is that if the central government gives the power to local governments, things will turn out worse, because the local council members and local police sometimes act terribly. Some local council members have close relationships with crime networks. It leaves the police no way to crack down. So we think the local governments won't have the ability to deal with such a complicated situation.
The place I was working at was often raided by the police without any warning. It was horrible. The police used to rush in, but luckily the staff outside had walkie-talkies, so they used to warn us and we could hide.
Chi-Chi's decided to leave the sex industry. She saved enough money to start up her own nail painting business, but she says she has no regrets.
It was simply a period of time that I needed to make money, so I never thought it would be a long-term job.
While Chi-Chi has the freedom to walk away from prostitution, not all women can. And so the debate over legalizing prostitution in Taiwan rages on.
That report by Kath Hearn. For more on how legalizing prostitution will affect Taiwan, we're in the capital, Taipei. And joining us on the panel are Professor Ding Nai-Fei of the Center for the Study of Sexualities from Taiwan's National Central University. Dr. Stephen Lakis is the head of the Human Rights and Public Policy Directorate at the Taiwan Theological College. And Justine Wang is from the Taipei Women's Rescue Foundation and is also the director of their anti-trafficking unit. Thank you very much for being with us today. Justine, if I could start with you. Now, this legislation will come into effect sometime at the end of this year. Why are you opposed to it?
I think the whole legislation is based on the delusion that better regulation would improve the situation of the women in prostitution. And I think that's an ineffective policy. And take the example in Holland, we see that they started to regulate prostitution in 1999, but over the 10 years, the area became really a dark hole of the crime. There's a lot of illegal prostitution going on there, and there's drugs, and there's human trafficking in that area. So even after 10 years, the government in Amsterdam, they decided to reduce the scale of the district, and they understand they need to improve the situation there. So I think that's really not an effective policy.
Now, Faye, Justine brings up some very valid points there, and she paints a very negative picture of this particular legislation. Would you agree?
I don't think it really helps decriminalization, and along with it, it would add a new kind of stigmatization that would actually make it harder for the women who work as sex workers, because it would, this legislation is actually putting the onus on local governments to decide whether they want to have specially created places, but local governments and peoples are actually grappling with layers of stigmatizations that have not really been aired and talked about, sufficiently talked about, with input from the women involved. And I think it's really important at this point to have the women who are working as sex workers and all those in association with them to be able to talk about these issues.
Stephen, would you agree that there hasn't been much consultation when it comes to this legislation?
I think this has been one of the biggest problems that we've faced in this debate, that there hasn't been a lot of public consultation at all. And the Constitutional Court gave the government a deadline of November this year. And this 2 years since the ruling has gone past very, very quickly, and there's been very little public consultation on this topic.
If that's the case, Justine, what do you think needs to happen then in order for this legislation to work?
Well, first, I think that the other part of this legislation is that the women and outside of the district, the women and the men would all be punished. And I think that's really not fair, because the amount they sort of punish the men and the women with the same amount of fine. And I think the money is actually nothing to the men as a customer. But it is a big amount to the women, because they were mostly fall into this industry, so-called industry, because of economic distress. So the fine would actually make their situation worse instead of stop the prostitution.
Why do you think that the rights of prostitutes have not been recognized earlier? Much like in the Western world, where rights of prostitutes are recognized. There's a union, there's a whole industry there. Why do you think it's not the same here in Taiwan?
I think we have a very particular cultural context here. We have a very large, sort of Confucian, Buddhist and Taoist population, and they haven't looked very favourably at the sex trade before, and so there's a lot of stigma still attached to the sex trade. So I think that is one contribution, and I think that makes it difficult for legalisation as well, that if we just say, well, legalisation will automatically remove that stigma or remove that public concern with regard to sex workers, I'm not sure that's going to really happen automatically. We have such a long history, a cultural tradition here, which sees the trade very negatively, that I don't think legalisation will just automatically change that.
Naife, do you think this legislation will change the cultural attitudes, the conservative cultural attitudes towards women in this industry?
I'm worried that it won't, and may make things worse, precisely by putting up the kind of punishment outside of the supposed special areas, and in effect ghettoizing and putting a new kind of space and yet stigma on the workers and sex work as a community.
Justine?
We having a lot of first-hand experiences working with these women, and we understand most of the women actually, if you give them the choices, they would choose otherwise. Most of them fall into this field because of economic distress. So they were breadwinner of the family, and they were single mothers, they were daughters with sick parents, and they were they were even have 6 siblings. So they were sacrifice themselves for the welfare of a family. And that's something that we don't want them to happen again. And if we legalize the whole prostitution things, we were attracting more and more women into this field, and maybe we were creating the channel for women to fall into this situation.
Do you think that is the case? Do you think the legislation will allow or will attract more women into this industry?
No, I don't think so, because I think we've had a lot of, in the past, we've had a lot of illegal acts, including in the 70s, dancing was illegal. Now legalizing dancing for high school children does not make for more people wanting to dance necessarily, and so I don't think that decriminalization or support supporting sex workers and listening to input from a very diverse communities of sex workers, I don't think this will actually encourage sex work, but it will allow those who have had experiences of exploitation to be able to speak out about it and to be able to help authorities help them through their own ways of understanding the difficulties that they are facing.
Stephen, do you think this legislation will stop exploitation of women, children in this industry?
I don't think that's a given at all, and I think that's part of the concern in this debate, that sometimes people will just assume that legalisation will automatically lead to an end of exploitation, and that's certainly not guaranteed. I think if the government just follows a line of decriminalisation, which just is to say, well, there will be no more penalties now for prostitution, without establishing welfare programs, education programs, complete networks of support for those involved in prostitution and the sex trade, I can't see that it will really have a huge effect on exploitation at all.
Perhaps the discussion about this legislation may actually help improve the rights of women.
Well, take the example for other countries. You see that for like Germany, they have a red light district and they have the reputation of good management, but still the whole district become a dark hole of crime. And also we found that the women in that district is maybe 50 to 80% is from other countries. And also they were exploited, seriously exploited. And also the customer is also, most of the customer is from other countries. So that means when you have a red light district, you attract a lot of people from other countries and other places to exploited women in that area. And we were actually attracting women in more disadvantage into that area. So I think that is not a policy. I mean, that is not a strategy to helping the women. If we want gender equality, we have to do it from education instead of legalize the prostitution. And I also want to bring another case from Sweden. Because maybe at the same time when Holland is decriminalized or maybe legalized the prostitution, Sweden using a different model. The model is that we don't punish the women, but we punish the men. So it has been proved to be very effective. The prostitution.
In reducing prostitution?
Yes.
This particular model that Taiwan will implement at the end of this year is supposed to be a model that perhaps other Asian countries can adopt. But many of you, well, all three of you are sort of saying there are definite problems with this particular legislation, this particular model. What do you think then can be done to make this model work?
I think it's important when dealing with problems such as trafficking not to augment, not to make the situation even more difficult, not to further stigmatize women who are engaged in sex work, in commercial sex, women and men who are engaged in sex work for other kinds of reasons, and who already have been speaking on their own behalves, on their communities' behalves.
Justine, for Asian nations who may be considering this same legislation, what would you say to them?
Well, I would say this is definitely not working. It's experiences from other countries. Or maybe, I know maybe no other Asian country has been adapted this, but other countries from in other continent has been adapted this, and they know it's not effective. So I would say let's not do this model, and we have to go back to more discussion on how to make it work.
Stephen, are you just as pessimistic about this legislation?
Well, I'd like to be more optimistic, and I hope that because we are all united in these core interests, that we want to stop exploitation where it is occurring, and we want to care for the welfare of those involved in the sex trade, that if we can really encourage the government to write some more laws into this legislative framework to say, well, we are going to care for those who are involved, and I think that would make us all very happy.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for being with us today. And that's all the time we have for this edition of 101 East. You can always follow the program through our website, podcast, Facebook, and now Twitter. From all the team here in Taipei, Taiwan, thanks for watching.